Arthur Blackwood knew exactly what it felt like to be a punchline. He was a circus clown, a man who paid for his meals by letting strangers laugh at his daily humiliation. Every night, he wiped the white grease paint off his face in a dark room, staring at a man at rock bottom. Years of taking pratfalls on stage gave Arthur a sharp education in audience psychology. Audiences handed over their money for the laughter, but Arthur saw them surrendering something far more valuable, their agency. He realized that a crowd will submit to anyone who steps on stage and perfectly fulfills their deepest, unvoiced expectations. He found an eager student for this theory in a Barcelona prison. Victor Graves was a sword swallower with a cold demeanor and a highly flexible moral compass. Their bond was forged in cynicism rather than friendship. They viewed the world as a collective mark, a vast landscape of pockets waiting to be picked. Once released, they survived as traveling grifters. They forged paintings. They swallowed fire for isolated villages, convincing the locals they had fallen from the sky. With every successful scam, Arthur refined his technique, learning exactly how to locate a target's greed and manipulate their blind belief. He crystallized a very simple philosophy. To steal a crowd's devotion, you don't need to threaten them. You simply have to find out what they hope for, build a symbol of that hope, and let them convince themselves it's real. The perfect testing ground for this philosophy was newly independent Albania. The country had recently broken free from its former rulers. It was fiercely proud, yet highly unstable, a nation holding its breath, waiting for the arrival of their anticipated royal leader, Prince Elias Hale. Arthur was reading a cheap local newspaper when he saw it. Staring back at him was a grainy photograph of Prince Elias. The royal had a serious gaze and a perfectly manicured beard. He also had Arthur's exact same face. The physical preparation took barely any effort. Arthur sprinkled salt and pepper powder into his hair and trimmed his beard to match the newspaper clipping. Meanwhile, Victor procured a dazzling, heavily decorated military uniform that practically demanded a salute. They sent a single, chillingly confident telegram to the provisional government and Durazzo. Prince Elias Hale is arriving. In a country where communication was shattered and the real prince remained a silent, distant figure, this one line of text acted as a definitive answer to a national crisis. The government, caught in a desperate scramble for legitimacy and fearing their neighbors' intentions, accepted the message without verification. The void of power was so deep that a single piece of paper was sufficient to build a throne. When Arthur's boat docked at the port of Durazzo, the sky was raining rose petals. The city had erupted into hysterical euphoria. Women wept, dignitaries bowed, and the streets were completely blocked by crowds trying to catch a glimpse of the man they believed was answering their prayers. Arthur stepped off the gangplank and immediately slowed his pace. A clown knows that moving too fast invites mockery. A king, however, never rushes. He moved with a glacial, deliberate confidence, forcing the entire country to synchronize to his rhythm. Waiting for him was General Edward Pasha, the man temporarily running the country. Surrounded by heavily armed soldiers, the general stepped forward, dropped to his knees, and offered Arthur the sword of absolute command. Arthur didn't take the weapon.
Instead, he reached down, lifted the terrified general off the ground, and pulled him into a warm embrace. The tension in the square vanished, replaced by explosive cheering. A single well-timed gesture of calculated mercy neutralized an entire military apparatus before a single shot could be fired. That night, safely behind the locked doors of their private chambers, Arthur and Victor threw off their royal coats and laughed until they couldn't breathe. They had walked through the front door and stolen a country. The next morning, the local politicians begged him to take the crown. Arthur played hard to get, claiming he wasn't worthy, letting the panic build in the room before finally, graciously, accepting the title of King Arthur I. His first royal decree was purely strategic. He declared a sudden, entirely fabricated war on neighboring Montenegro. This gave the volatile public a unifying external enemy, ensuring no one was looking too closely at their new monarch. With the public distracted, he executed the real grift. Arthur ordered the national treasury opened so he could richly reward the local chiefs and military officers. He was buying their total, unquestioning loyalty using their own gold. The perfect trap makes the victim feel powerful. By making the locals feel chosen and enriched, Arthur guaranteed they would fiercely protect the man who was actively robbing them. The illusion lasted exactly 2 days. A second telegram arrived at headquarters. This one was from the actual Prince Elias Hale, who was very much alive and nowhere near Albania. General Pasha read the paper and realized the catastrophic mistake he had made. Humiliated and furious, the general gathered his armed guards and stormed through the palace. They kicked open the doors to Arthur's private chambers, drawing their weapons to execute the man who had made a fool of the state. Arthur didn't flinch. He stood up, pointed directly at General Pasha, and barked a single order to the guards: "Arrest the general for treason." The guards froze. Arthur reminded them of the gold they had just pocketed. He backed them into a brutal psychological corner. If they sided with the general, they had to admit to the entire country they were gullible idiots duped by a vagrant. If they sided with Arthur, they kept their pride and their money. Faced with a choice between a humiliating reality and a highly profitable fiction, human nature routinely chooses the fiction. The guards lowered their weapons, turned toward their general, and dragged him out of the room. The lie had survived its greatest test, defended by the very people it was exploiting. But Arthur knew the clock had run out. That midnight, wrapped in dark cloaks, he and Victor slipped out of the palace. They carried the bulk of the Albanian treasury down to the docks and vanished on a fishing boat before the sun could rise. Years later, the gold eventually ran dry. Arthur returned to his life as a circus performer. For a few pennies, he stood outside his tent wearing fake medals, letting tourists photograph the crown who stole a kingdom. He had conquered a nation without firing a single bullet. He had no army, no royal blood, and no legitimate authority. He possessed only a sharp understanding of self-deception. Manipulation only succeeds when a society is already desperate to be deceived. When the need for a savior outweighs the truth, the crowd will always find a way to let the imposter through the door.